All right, man. Hey, it is a special day. It's been like a 2-month hiatus, but OTXNT is back. Just we are in different locations today. You look like you're in your home, unless that's an
I
incredibly
am
decorated office. If not, but I'm sure that's Jen's handiwork. Uh,
very, very much. And I've got kids and people coming, so I might have some interruptions. I'll just try to mute if something goes awry.
that's just
But
how we roll.
I've
Yeah.
got my Charlie Brown Christmas mug with my decaf coffee. And so Merry Christmas to you,
Merry
Dr. Pate.
Christmas to you. I am drinking Arab mint. That's just called Moroccan mint. It's like what I grew up drinking. It's like a mint tea, but I am hidden here at the church in Franklin, Tennessee, where I'm now at, and ready to roll. So, hey, we got a very interesting topic that we're going to deal with. It's timely as we are dealing with the Christmas coming up this weekend. And so we're going to be talking about maybe some of y'all have heard it go around. I know I've heard it a bunch of times already now, too. And I wanted to look into it more of this idea of where was Jesus born in Bethlehem? Was he born in this, tower area where they were holding on the sacrificial sheep destined for Jerusalem? Is that where he was born? Or was it just kind of how we have grown up here in the story? So I really want to tackle that and just look more into it. If you're ready to do it, man, let's start it up. Let's talk about it.
All right, well, let's pray. It's been so long since we've launched one. I forgot a little format here, but
We have a format.
let's
Yeah,
let's go ahead and pray, and then
let's
we'll
do it.
jump in. I've got the Christmas decor as we try to work through maybe a Christmas myth.
That's right.
But yes, let's pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
All right, man. So you were actually the first one to hear this before I ever did. So break it down.
It's not uncommon. You get into a Bible study, and usually this time of year, you're looking at Matthew or Luke or maybe some of the prophecies, and somebody has heard something either on television or in their own studies online, and they bring it up. And so I think the way I heard about it is one of my very intent students of the Bible. She was bringing this up in a class to say, that it wasn't just Bethlehem, but there was a tower in Bethlehem, the Migdol Tower, and that was a tower where the priests were, the priest shepherds who raised the lambs. And these were special lambs that were raised in order to be sacrificed, so that they were well regulated and they were well cared for, even to the point of taking slips of cloth and wrapping the lambs when they were little in cloth so that they would not be damaged, so that you would not end up with a blemished lamb. And so all of this to say is stacking types upon types of what Christ would be. That the Bethlehem, to be born in the place where the sacrificial lambs were being raised, and to be put in a manger and wrapped in cloths, just in the same way that the lambs were cared for so that they would not be blemished. And so it just kind of adds a layer to the Christ story. And when I first heard it, I'm like, well, that's very interesting, because I had never heard that before. And since I actually was going to use that in a sermon illustration recently, and then I'm like, well, I better look this up and try to dig into it. And I decided not to use it in a sermon illustration, just because it's not based in it's not very strong evidence, let me say, to back up these claims. And so and that's what we're essentially talking about. We're gonna crush people's dreams a little bit here, I think, in going through this. But Christmas will still be merry. It'll be all right.
Yeah.
But yeah, is that about what you've heard?
Yeah, I mean, that's about the same thing. Is I was actually talking with one of our Bible study leaders and said, hey, have you ever heard this before? And my initial reaction was, I bet that is something from Jewish tradition, because we don't see, there's nothing, if there was something in the text about it that was explicit, we would be talking about it and recognizing, making those leaps. And so a lot of the time, when you have something novel like that, I think a lot of that is because someone has done some legwork, gone into maybe some of the Jewish traditions and found something like that, which is, it seems to be, as we've dug into it, pretty much that. I mean, we have one reference, right? The big reference that everybody wants to jump from and say this is it. This is some of the proof in the Bible is the Micah 4:8, and Micah 4 comes right before Micah 5, where is the passage about the Messiah coming from Bethlehem. 4:8 says, "And you, watchtower for the flock," right, which would have been called Migdol Eder, fortified hill of daughter Zion, the former rule will come to you. The sovereignty will come to daughter Jerusalem. So that's it. And so people have said, see, that's the one. Messiah is supposed to come to that tower. But even when you read that, the parallelism seems to be talking about Jerusalem there. And I don't really get the explicit that means that tower was in Bethlehem, but they go and make some jumps to, Genesis, talking about, but it says that even when he leaves Ephrathah, he leaves and goes out to Migdol Eder. So that's the kind of issue so far that I've got, is there's not really any explicit reference to this tower of the flock, and even what the tower of the flock is, to Bethlehem. So that's the first part that I was going to throw out there.
Yeah, and I, one person who kind of helped me kind of work through some of the issues that I think it's worth just mentioning, because I'm using a little bit of his argumentation here, is Chad Bird, and his website is the www.1517.org. I've never met him, but again, he's a little article on this topic that if anyone's interested, they can read up on. But he does, again, the connection of the Tower of Eder, which is in reference to when Jacob set a pillar on her grave, which is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. This is Genesis, 35:20. And then Israel journeyed and pitched his tent beyond the Tower of Eder. And so is there a connection between this Micah Tower of Eder, or is there not a connection? A shepherd's tower, or a tower of the flock, is this something that's pretty common? Is this something that would have been a landmark that everybody would have recognized? And so at some point in time, there's a Targum of Pseudo-Jonathan that connects these verses together in order to basically read into Genesis that where Rachel is buried by the Tower of Eder would be the place where the king would be from. And so that passage would say, oh, wow, that's a lot of evidence there. Maybe there's more here than we first considered, except that this is kind of Jewish pesher, where they do commentary and develop things. And this happens centuries after Christ. And so, the earliest thing I can find a reference to Pseudo-Jonathan is like 1600s of, oh goodness, where I had it. You always get worried that people are going to say, oh, your dates are off. But
you just roll with it. I made it. Yeah, it's there
an Italian
somewhere.
Manuscript. It's an Italian manuscript. 1598 is the earliest manuscript we have. It could date much earlier than that, but that's the reality of what we're dealing with. We're not dealing with something that's early. And that's the thing. People will say ancient documents, and they're referring to something that's 1,500 years later than the events. That's not early in comparison to what we're dealing with. And so I wouldn't put a lot of faith in that, but it is a pretty significant deal to say, okay, so at least somebody at some point in time was connecting these towers together. And I think that that with some of the things in the Mishnah are what led the kind of the main guy that's behind this to bring together this whole big picture that we're talking about. But the reality is there's a lot of distance between Micah and Jacob. And there is no definitive reality that the towers are the same towers that we're even talking about. I mean, you're talking about a tremendous gap, before the Exodus, even between the one tower and the tower that Micah is referring to.
And usually, if something in the Old Testament is there, they usually make a reference like, and that tower is still here today, to make it very clear, like this one's not gone yet. It's the same one, right?
Right.
For sure.
And it could be, but it's still, even if it was, even if you said, okay, this is the same place, it doesn't necessarily mean that this is what we're referring to in light of the whole story. And so that's the thing is that, okay, but here's what the pressure reads. Jacob proceeded and spread his tent beyond the Tower of Eder, Migdol Eder, the place from whence it is to be the King Messiah will be revealed at the end of the days. And so this Jewish commentary has read in not only the Micah 4:8 passage, but also the Micah 5 passage, Bethlehem, where the king will come from, and has read it into the Genesis passage to connect these towers. It's not uncommon to see that kind of commentary happen, but it's clearly not what the biblical text says. And so you can kind of see, okay, that's a layer that was added. And then, that layer gets added and added and added until we get this whole thing that we talked about with these lambs being wrapped up and carried in a manger and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that kind of stuff too. It's like, what are the swaddling clothes for the lambs? Like, I don't see that. I don't know where that is. I mean, really, the strongest stuff that we've got is you've got the one Targum and some of the Mishnah stuff, and then you've got Alfred Edersheim, 1800s Messianic Jewish historian, and he makes that connection, right? And really, what he actually says is kind of helpful too, is he says that the Messiah was to be born in Bethlehem was a settled conviction. Everybody knows that. That's not an issue thing. He goes, equally so was the belief that he was to be revealed from Migdol Eder, the tower of the flock. This Migdol Eder was not the watchtower for the ordinary flocks, which pastured on the barren sheep ground beyond Bethlehem, but lay close to the town on the road to Jerusalem. A passage in the Mishnah leads to this conclusion that the flocks which pastured there were destined for temple sacrifices, and accordingly that the shepherds who watched over them were not ordinary shepherds. And so that's kind of, and he goes on, but that's his thing, is he's writing in the 1800s, and he's using rabbinic sources for that too. So once again, we're not dealing with, I think all that stuff is interesting, but I'm always weary of making too much out of rabbinic material. I think it's interesting, definitely. Like, there's a lot of things I think that are very interesting insights, but I don't want to, I always get cautious about saying, well, then that's exactly how it was, right? We know definitively, because I think we get in a lot of weird areas, but I just want to caution a lot of people. We get roped into that because it's novel to us. It's novel to read some of those things, and I think we should, but I don't think we should ever get to a point where we think, well, that's the definitive thing, and then treat it like if we have not, the rest of us are not enlightened because we've not truly understood it the way that it was meant to be in light of this, tradition, Jewish tradition that tied some of those things together. So that's kind of where I'm at. So that's where that is. But let's talk about this then, just in terms of what we think really, where he really was born then, because like I said, it's a nice thought. There's some precedent within the last, 300 to 500 years of somebody tying those two together. But where do you think, I'm just going to ask you as a New Testament guy, where do you think he was born? Cave, house, stall? What do you think?
Well, I've always kind of held to the cave idea that they had carved out some cave space for animals, and it would have been somebody's animal, so it's connected to somebody's real estate at some place. And so I always held the view that night he was at a cave stall for animals, and then they remained in Bethlehem for a little while, and then the wise men would have arrived later. And there's every reason for them to stay, because there's probably a shame on Mary back home, because they could view her as having gotten pregnant too soon, and so why go
and
back?
On Joseph too, right?
Right, absolutely. So and coming back and saying no, virgin birth may not convince everybody, right? So I see a good reason for them to stick around for a little bit, and then they go from there to Egypt. So that's the view that I've held. Also, just in general, I wanted to pick up on what you said. The Mishnah, which is where the one scholar is drawing some information, it dates to about 200 AD. So it's older. It's closer to the birth, but it's still much later. And so perhaps they were special animals that were for the temple. Perhaps not. I don't really no, the Mishnah is, again, questionable. It's late. And I think the issue that we have to deal with, especially at Christmas, is we're always looking for something, some new way to share the story, because you can only preach Christmas so many ways, right? It's the same story. You don't have a lot of scriptural verses to work with. I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to preach on Sunday this week, because do I just pull one out and reuse it? Because
Yeah, it's tricky because
it's
we're already
Christmas.
going to do it on
Yeah.
Christmas Eve. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think there's a temptation in the passages we're very familiar with, always to try to find something else and pull some string and get it there. But that's my view of what I think happened. And so I think the shepherds were there the night he was born. I think the wise men came a little later. So what do you think?
Well, okay, let me just say this too, because you're right on what you just said about some of the pieces of just the story. I think there's certain things that we can be completely sure of, is that the New Testament does give Jesus significance as the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Like when you read John is very careful to kind of associate the sacrificing of the Passover lambs with the sacrifice of Jesus. Like he's tying those together, putting them in that timeline. It happened in that timeline for a reason too. I think all of that is stuff that's layers that are there, but John makes it very clear to show us those pieces, like to give us that, to give us more. And I think if there was more, there would have been something to kind of even show that there and not just leave it there. So that's my other little take on that. But here's what I think. I would advocate people looking at it. I really like, if you go to like biblicalarchaeology.org, which is put out by the Associates for Biblical Archaeology. They have a lot of good stuff. They're good conservative archaeologists there. And I was reading an article from them just about, what did the lay of the land look like for the town? It's interesting. I found two different pieces to it. So one was a guy who was talking about the caves that are there, and that it would not be out of the question to have a cave that was built in and then a house next to it. That is what is part of your kind of your courtyard. You put the animals in the cave and then you're there in this house next to it. The other would be, they said they also have seen that in archaeology from layers, that you would have had your bottom layer of the house would have been where you place your animals. At night, you bring them in, they stay indoors. And the upper level is where the families were. And that, and I do see this as, when you think about they're coming into the town and they're trying to find a place to stay, they're going to find it's a very hospitable place. They're looking for a place to stay. There's family that's all there too. And so it appears, at least one of the articles that was making it says it's probable that what it was there's no more rooms, but you can stay downstairs. It's private. It's got the animals there, but you can be downstairs. And even that, I do think, you've got, probably the women who are in the house available, helping, things like that too. So I got to go either way. It's either a cave system that's connected to a house, or it's that bottom level place that animals are. That's where I land, that we're near homes and there's space. And it's not that people just said, there's nothing for you, just go find some random, here's the random cave all by itself. No, I think it's all connected and very close.
Yeah. And, again, there's just so much really good research out there. So I don't dismiss things that people share that I haven't heard before, because again, there's a lot of good information, and I just kind of have to put it on hold until I have a chance to sift it. I think one of the things that we continue to go back to is that we don't need these exterior things, archaeological evidence, historical things, Mishnah, things outside of the text to know what the text tells us. And if we stay faithful in the text, the story makes sense. The story is whole. And so all these extra things that may add color to the story or more depth are fun and wonderful if they're accurate. And the hard thing is that so many of these things are speculations at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so, I think the safest thing is to stick with what the text says, Luke doesn't make any big case about the lambs and priest shepherds and the tower. You think he would, or you'd think Matthew would in particular, because Matthew is looking for prophecies. He's pulling stuff,
Yeah,
even some places that are a little tricky.
for
So
sure.
the fact that no issue is made there makes me think that that's probably not accurate. If it is, great, but I wouldn't preach it. I wouldn't teach it in that sense, because I don't want to give people a sense of there's more evidence than really there is, and then give them opportunity later on for somebody who's opposed to Christianity to start pulling pieces out
Yeah.
and undermining firm foundations of faith, because we intermix those with weak foundations.
That's a great insight, by the way, is Matthew is so big on showing things. And sometimes you're like, Matthew, is that was a prophecy, and it is,
That
you've got to do
Nazarene
your,
one, right?
yeah, you got to go do your homework and go back and find, like, even the out of Egypt I call my son, like, it takes a few readings and you got to go back and dig in to understand what he's talking about. And I think it would be, if that were that significant, I think Matthew would have included something like that to say, and it was, that he was there because it said a Migdol Eder, you were going to, something like that. Like he would fulfill that. So that is a really good thing, just because of what we know from how the biblical writers wrote. But I think you're absolutely right. Stick with the text. The text is significant. All of that is all there of who Jesus is. We don't have to import that in. We just don't want to import it into the text that we have. That's not in that text. It is in other places of who he is and the significance. And those things are all tied into different parts of the gospel and the Old Testament. We don't need to try to force that into it. But like I said, I think it's well-intentioned. We want to see more pieces of how Jesus connects to it all. But I would say that is more of it's just a nice thought. And it's interesting, and it could be true, but I don't think it is. But we do know the stories, we know the details, and I do think in the details we have some room for, saying where does he stay? Like, it's not, they don't give us all that, because that was not a huge concern. Was it a house? Was it a cave? Is it the same house that he's in when the wise men come? Or how often, how late does it? We don't know all those things. But there's room to say, let's study, let's look, and let's come to the conclusions that we want to come down on with that. But based on, I think, the text, and if we want to bring in some of the supplemental stuff, that's cool. But we start with the text and leave it as that. So that's all I got, man. That's kind of all I want to do, is just work through that.
I think that's good. Again, and we're not trying to wreck people's, newfound things about Christmas. Again, some of this could be true. It's just we don't really know, and so we should make more of it than we can. So I hope that your Christmas isn't ruined. The reality is, the text says that born of a virgin in Bethlehem, angels heralded his birth. Glory to God in the highest. And shepherds were there, and the wise men are there. Whether it's the same time or set apart by a distance of years, we don't know.
And that's significant in and of itself. Yeah. Like, those details alone are just profound, too.
Hey, where do you think the wise men were from, just for kicks?
You know what? More recently, I've come down. I was reading an article from a guy who I actually knew growing up. He's at was it in Jordan Evangelical Theological Seminary at Jets, and he wrote an article talking that he thinks they're actually they're Arab, and you get some of that based on what their gifts are, and you get some of that based on, once you start digging into the kind of the history of what happened with those tribes, and a lot of them were Jewish at that time, or converts. So yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a high chance. They're either, in my opinion, they have to be either Arabian or they have to be Babylonian Persian, in that, and I think they have to be God-fearing, like you see in in Book of Acts and stuff like that, where these guys are they're God-fearers. They're not necessarily, maybe they're Jews or converts, but maybe not. To make a trip like that to come and worship Jesus. That's where I'm at. Where do you think?
I read a book that argued that the Nabateans, they're from the Nabatean Empire, which, that's George. So I just thought that'd be fun, since you
So there we go. We've settled it right there in
Yeah.
less than a minute. They were Arabs, is what they were. They were Nabateans. They were from the region of Arabia. Petra. That's where they were.
That's right. Indiana Jones, he was going there to find the major, not the cup.
That's right.
I don't think they took the major back with them.
I don't
Anyway,
think so too.
cool
well, hey
deal,
man, let's wrap this thing up. It's another one. We just need to get it in, and I'm ready. We're going to try to bring this back in January, and if you have a list of topics or things that you would like dealt with, let us know. Otherwise, we're going to do stuff like this, which is, things that just, and this is what I like about this, right? Is things that have popped up in our conversations, even though we're in two different states now, very far apart. We've had similar conversations with our church people. And so it's fun to kind of deal with that together. All right, man, you ready?
Yeah, man, close this out.
Let's do it. May the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord look with favor on you and give you peace. All right, God bless. Thanks for watching, guys. And don't forget, like, subscribe, listen, and talk to you later.
God bless.
Bye.
Take care.